Circle of Hope Network, doing life and being church together.
When I wake up in the morning, I sound like that, but, I don't expect it when I preach. But tomorrow we head back to Dallas, and I want to thank you for letting us come and be with you. This is camp meeting number 5 for me this year. I've got 3 more to go. I did 8 last year as well, and 8 the year before that, and 6 the year before that. So I'm used to seeing camp meetings. I've done a lot of them. In fact, I was doing some math and realized it's about, in the last 15 years, about 70 or 80 camp meetings I've done. Held about 150 marriage seminars across the world, and shot about 400 television shows in the last 15 years. So the Lord has kept us busy and kept us running, and that's good. When I wake up in the middle of the night, I ask 2 questions. Question number 1, where am I? Question number 2, where's the bathroom? Yeah, I don't know. You're in a different hotel. You don't know where you are. You wake up at home and you can't remember where things are because you haven't been there much. So I told a buddy of mine that my mattress is going to last twice as long as him because I use mine half as much. And so, but the Lord has kept us busy and kept us running, and that's all right. Monday I turned 67, and I'll be 67 Monday. Yeah, if I make it that far, but 67 on Monday. So the traveling gets a little bit old. It gets a little bit old, but it's what God has called us to do right now. We've been talking about Luke's Gospel, the 15th chapter. Jesus was being challenged because he was hanging out with people who were not quite as holy as those who were the religious leaders, the religious associates. These were the people of the earth, people of the land. And they couldn't take all the time it needed to observe all the little rules that they had for being a Jew in those days. Rules for washing your hands, rules for eating, what to eat together. You couldn't eat milk and meat together. A lot of rules like that you had to be careful about. And when you ate, who you ate with, the prayers you would say, how you would wash your hand. That was very prescribed how to do that. If you're working on the farm, you don't have time to do that nonsense. You're lucky to get something to eat. And so most people couldn't do that. They couldn't do that. Jesus hung out with those people, and it upset these religious leaders. It upset them terribly. So he told parables to explain that they were supposed to be shepherds of this flock, and they had ignored them. In fact, they even turned their backs on them. They'd lost their sheep, but he had come to find them. He found the sheep. He found the coin. He was the one who came to find them and to love them. And when he found them, he was going to celebrate with them. And heaven was celebrating as well. And now we come to the last of those 3 parables, and this is the parable about the prodigal son. But in order to understand this parable, we have to understand something about the culture and about these people. So let me share with you a few things. First of all, I've been driving throughout Canada here quite a bit with some of the camp meetings I'm doing. Beautiful land you have. And I married a Canadian, so I understand this. You can take the girl out of Canada, but you can't take Canada out of the girl. I mean, that's right, isn't it? I mean, she is a proud Canadian. We celebrate Canada Day now in Texas because of her. We live in a complex of townhomes, and so there are a community of people there who know us, and they know her because she talks to everyone. I thought I was an extrovert till I married her, and now I realize I must have been an introvert all these years. I had no idea. And she makes friends with everybody, and she goes to what I call the field office. When it gets real hot during the day, she'll go out to the pool where all these people gather, and they just love her. And so they all buy Canadian flags, and they're celebrating Canada Day with her because of her influence there. She doesn't just spread the gospel, she spreads Canada, But Canadians are proud, and they love their land, and especially those that work the land. They recognize the beauty of this place, and they recognize the fertility of that soil, and they want to take care of it. They don't want just a good harvest this year, but take care of it and manage it in such a way that for every generation there's a harvest. Every generation the land is well maintained, and it produces. They give their lives to that land. It's rather like the musical that they had years ago, Oklahoma. The phrase in that song, "We know we belong to the land, and the land we belong to is grand." It's not that we own real estate. The land owns us. It gets in your soul. Your soul. In fact, you take that concept and you put it on steroids, and you got the Jews and how they feel and felt about Israel, the promised land. As much as you love your land, and as much as you've given yourself to it, if you're a farmer here, it pales into insignificance when compared to the Jewish connection to their land. It was very much an agrarian society, but that land had been given to them by God. They would live for it, they would die for it, but it also represented more than just their livelihood. It was their name to be in that place. That farm would be given over to the next generation and the next generation, and their name would never be removed from the promised land. And it was a part of their identity as a Jew. It was a religious as well as a national identity. The land was their soul. It was a spiritual thing for them. Not just finances, not just the pride and of the heritage and nationality. This was their soul. And you never, ever, ever, ever sold your land. If anyone had to, it meant that they fell on such bad times they had absolutely no other option, because you never sold your land. And the laws, as God had set it up, were set up so that eventually that land would come back to you. Even if you went through hard times, eventually it would come back to your family, because no family was to be dispossessed from the land. That's how important this was to them. And so land was important. The other thing that's important for us to understand about this is that even though you own this land, and you might, if you were good at farming, you can expand your influence and you buy more land. You have a big farm, but you never lived on the land. You lived in a village close to the land. And there were these villages set up all over Israel, the agrarian societies, and there'd be a little village of about 200 to 300 people on about 5 to 6 acres. And so that means that there were streets in these villages, but they were just wide enough to get a camel through. And that means that these people, 200 to 300 people, were living very compactly compressed together. They did that for community, but also for safety. If you're out in the land and there are a lot of wild animals, and sticks are hard to beat a lion with, and wolves or whatever else you got out there. And the days before you could buy a shotgun and take care of them, you're at risk. And marauders or robbers, you're at risk. So they would band together in communities of 200 to 300 for protection. Some of these were walled and others were not, but that's where they lived, and they lived compactly there. That meant living that close together with that kind of a national and religious identity. Everybody knew everybody else's business. If you had a disagreement with your wife in the morning, by noon, everybody knew about the disagreement and had chosen sides. Everybody knew, chosen sides. That's how compressed this was. Now, living in those villages, there were basically 3 groups of people. There were the landowners and their families. Then there were skilled craftsmen. These were people who had a skill that they had apprenticed in, and it was important enough that they would be paid well for that. And then there was a third class, and these were slaves. Slavery was different in that age. Anybody could be a slave if you fell on hard enough times. You would only be a slave usually for up to 7 years. There were special circumstances where you could extend that, but usually your servitude would be over after 7 years. And so these 3 groups of people lived in these villages, and usually about 200 to 300 in one of these villages. The parable that Jesus tells here, when you understand all of this as background, the parable begins to come to life. Now, there are a few other things we'll pick up on the culture as we go through this, but these are important things to remember in the background as Jesus tells this third and final parable about how God deals with lost things. We pick it up in verse 11, and he said, "A man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me.' So he divided his wealth between them." Now, when he said this, his audience gasped, and their blood began to boil, because any son who said, "I want my share of the inheritance now," is a son who's basically telling his father, I really wish you were dead. And this is a society and a culture that reveres the elderly. In fact, if indeed there's to be a leader, it's going to be the older one. If a decision has to be made, everyone turns to the oldest person in the group. They all revere the elderly. And then for a young man to say to his father, in essence, I wish you were dead, basically there was a ceremony that the village would enact if they heard this happen. And it was basically a ceremony where they would disown the son. That means that if a famine comes, we're not feeding you. You're not a part of us. You have lost your identity as a Jew, as a member of our community. We disown you. We will not even speak to you now. That was a fearsome thing to happen to someone, because this is shame in a shame-avoidant society. They would shame the individual. In that culture, you didn't say, Johnny, you did a bad thing. Is Johnny, shame on you. Shame on you for bringing shame on our family. Not, Johnny, you did a bad thing. They would shame, and shame avoidance is what you didn't want that. But you controlled your children by shaming them. It's not real good parenting, but still, that's what they would do, right? That's what they would do. And so this is something that would be pronounced upon this boy, and in some cultures, sometimes in Israel, they could even kill the lad. For him to say this. Now, if a man had two sons, normally when he died, his property would be divided into three parts, and the older son would take two, would be the new acknowledged leader of the family, and the younger son would take one. So that means that basically this younger son is due a third of the estate. This is a wealthy man. No doubt he has skilled craftsmen that he hires. He has slaves that work for him, and of course the sons work for him. They don't get paid because they're owners. But for him to say, I want my share of the inheritance, the law did not allow for a man to transfer title of his property to his sons while the man is still alive. At least not in such a way that the property could be sold. So in other words, if the younger son got the property and wanted to sell it, he could sell it, but the new owner could not take possession until the father died. Well, why would you give money for property that you couldn't use for probably 10 to 20 years if the man's in good health? You don't know how long he's going to live. So you couldn't do that. There was no provision in the law to release title for land given to a son when the father is still alive. But if the father did say, I give this land to you, the father still could live off the produce of the land. Anything he wanted was his, but the understanding that now the sons are controlling it. But this father did an amazing thing. He was insulted by his son to the point where he should have just slapped him. He should have called the village in and said, you know what my son said? They would disown him. He could have even, at certain times in the history of Israel, had the son put to death. He didn't do any of that. He took the shame that the son brought to him because the son took his love and rejected it and told his father, I wish you were dead. He took the pain of that shame and turned it to grace. And he did for the son what the son requested of him. He gave him his property. And again, verse 12, the younger son said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. In verse 13, it says, not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country. And there he squandered the estate with loose living. So not only did he give him his share of the property and the sheep and the goats and everything else he had, but he allowed him to do something the law had made no provision for. He allowed him to sell it, and the use of the property transferred to the new owner immediately. Negotiations for property at that time could take months or even years. Back and forth negotiations. They loved the negotiating more than they loved the property almost, you know. They love trying to go back and forth and get a better deal. He did it now. It says that he did it quickly, in not many days. Not only will we take the money, but you can use the property now while I'm still alive. No provision in the law for that to happen, but he did it anyway. That's how much he loved his son. And he let the boy go, in part, I think, in order to avoid the ceremony the villagers likely would have enacted, disowning the boy. He didn't want that shame for his son. So the boy took the money and went to a far country. It says he used it with loose living. Later, the older son will accuse him of immorality. But in the word translated as loose living, there's no hint of immorality. It may or may not have been immoral living, but there's no hint of that given here. Basically, what it means is he lived lavishly. He spent money like it was water. He just lived big. He lived large. Not necessarily immorally, we don't know. He may have, may not, but it's not implied by this word. The older brother accused him of that, but we don't know what he did. Verse 14, now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. Now, a famine in that generation and that age is different than what it would be today. If indeed there's no rain here and no way of irrigating crops, and the crops fail, you can still eat if you got money, because things are trucked in, and you can buy vegetables in your grocery store that are not grown here. We do that in Texas. We buy things that are grown in Canada, things that are grown in Mexico and in South America. It's all shipped in, right? You got refrigeration and all sorts of things. It's a little more expensive when it's shipped in, but you can buy it. There was no rapid means of transportation, no refrigeration. If you couldn't grow it here and it wasn't here, it didn't matter how much money you had, you died. And so a famine without much, the way people would survive is family groups and clans and villages would gather together, pool their resources, and meagerly dole it out so that hopefully we can last until it rains again and we can get a crop. Otherwise, you don't survive. Loners did not survive. The boy had just turned his back on his family, and when a famine hit, even if he'd had money, he was going to die. Didn't matter how much money you have, no one's going to sell you food if it means they're going to die. You don't have that kind of money. And so the boy didn't even have money, and he's going to die because no one's going to help him. He doesn't belong to any family group. He's a foreigner. If someone's going to die, it's going to be him. His only hope would be to go home, but that would be shameful to go home as the one who had brought shame on his family, rejected his village, and now that he's hungry, go home. He couldn't do that. So he did what people did in that age. He found someone who had money, who had food, and he just attached himself to him. The guy, it was like gum on his shoe. He couldn't get rid of the kid. Every place he went, the kid is right there. Doing things for him, trying to attach himself to him so maybe he could get something to eat. And he thought, I'm going to get rid of this guy. He's a Jew. Go feed my pigs. He did it. That's how desperate he was. But even that job was not paying well because he was hungry. The kid was still hungry. Verse 16, and he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving him anything. The pods most likely are carob pods. And although especially the sweet variety, although they could, the product could be eaten, the pods themselves, you can grind them up and feed them to cattle or to pigs, but human stomachs cannot process that. When a Jewish boy is envious of a pig, he's hit rock bottom. And the boy watched the pigs eat those pods, things that he could not eat. And the pigs were full, and he was hungry. And he watched the pigs survive, and he was afraid he was going to die because nobody gave him anything. And so he comes up with a plan. Verse 17, and it says here, and he came to his senses, but really a better translation is, instead of he came to his senses, he began to consider his lot, or he thought about himself, is what he's saying here. He said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? Notice, he's not envious of his father's slaves. There's three groups of people work for the father. The sons, and they don't get paid because they own the land. You don't get paid. You're producing for yourself. You're the inheritors, and so they don't get paid. You got the skilled craftsmen who get paid a lot. And then you have slaves, and they don't get paid because they already owe you money, and they're working off the debt. That's why they're slaves, because they owe too much to ever pay you back. And so they work for a certain amount of time, then they get a fresh start. And he says, my father has hired hands. He's thinking about the skilled craftsmen. And their day's wages is more than, usually a common laborer, a day's wage would feed your family for a day with very little left over. He said, my father has hired hands, skilled craftsmen, who not only are able to feed their family on what they earn, but they have more left over. I'm a single man. I'm not a skilled craftsman. If I could gain a skill with being single and I save my money, I could probably buy back the farm that I sold. So this is more than likely what he's thinking. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. Now, some people look at that and say, well, that's an apology. There's no one in the East that would accept that as an apology. An apology would say, Father, I shamed you by rejecting your love. I shamed you and my village by rejecting them. I shamed you by selling our land, selling my soul. I sold it. And I shamed you by wasting the proceeds of that among the Gentiles. I shamed you and God. It needs to be that detailed. And then usually the boy would fall on his face and beg to grab the father's feet to kiss them. The father may or may not hear him. He may or may not listen to him. In a tender moment, the boy might be able to kiss the father's hand, but at this point, he's begging to kiss his feet. And he would go that detailed over what he had done. That's not included here. In fact, when you look at what he says, he's quoting the same thing that Pharaoh said to Moses when the plagues came. A plague would come, and Pharaoh would call in Moses, I've sinned before God and in your sight. It's word for word what Pharaoh said, and Pharaoh was not repenting. There was no repentance in his heart. He was working Moses. He was doing his best to work Moses. That direct quote comes from the lips of this boy, and that's intentional in this parable. There's no genuine repentance. This boy is working his dad. He's thinking, maybe if I can go back and say that, maybe I can convince him to help me get an internship, an apprenticeship someplace, so I can be a skilled craftsman. And then I'll save my money, I'll remain single, and I'll buy back the farm. And then maybe they'll forgive me, and I can be reaccepted in the family. He wants to earn his way back. And he's using the same language that Pharaoh used with Moses. I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And really, when you look at the tense of that, a better translation is, I'm not now worthy. I'm not currently worthy. The implication being, but if you make me a craftsman, I'll earn the money, I'll buy the land back, and then I'll be worthy. He wants to be a son again, but he wants to buy his way back. Make me as one of your hired men. Give me an apprenticeship so I can become a skilled craftsman, and I can earn my way back. So he got up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. The father was doing a strange thing. Normally in this story, what you would expect for this culture is the son would come and the mother would be watching for him. There's no mention of a mother in the story. The mother would be watching. She would see the son. She would run to him and embrace him and kiss him and make him feel like he was welcome and say, come on in. Come on, listen, I'll talk to the father for you. Maybe he can come in. Come over here. Let's clean up a bit. Now listen, when he come in, here's what you say. Here's what you do. She'd instruct him. Then she'd go, you ought to see him. He's so pathetic. Oh, honey, I just feel so bad for him. I missed him so much. And he's such a wretch. He's skinny. He hasn't eaten. He's so sad. You got to. Then finally the father would say, show him in. And then the boy would come in and just fall flat on his face and, Father, please forgive me. And he'd go through the long list of the apology and beg for the opportunity to kiss the father's foot. And once allowed that, the father might begin to relent and feed the boy and maybe eventually forgive the boy. He would not have an inheritance again, but maybe he could work for him and live there. That's what you expect to happen. But that didn't happen. There's no mention of a woman, of a mother here. The father plays the role of the woman. He sits out with a servant, no doubt, a slave who's tending to his needs, and he's watching the horizon because he knows that boy of his. He knows that he's going to go through that money like water. He knows he's got no sense that a fool and his money will soon be parted, and he knows that boy, he's going to come home. And he's there watching for him. When he sees him, he sees that familiar gate. He runs towards him, and rich men never ran. They wore these long robes, and you couldn't run because there wasn't enough room. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to reach between your legs and pull it up. You put on your belt first, you tie a rope or a belt, and then you tuck that robe into the belt. You just created shorts. And then you could run. But rich men never bore their legs because it was thought to be shameful to show your legs. And they never ran. They always kept one foot on the ground, always. It was thought to be unseemly to do otherwise. Poor men would run. Rich men would meander. In Texas, we say they mosey. They take their time because when you're rich, they'll wait for you. It was dignified, and it was all about the show. But the father said, forget that. He put the belt on, he grabbed the robe, he's tucked it in, and this man's running, and the servant's thinking, he's lost his mind. What's wrong with him? Then he sees the boy. He's going to kill him. The boy sees the father coming. He says, he's going to kill me. But the father does something unexpected. He doesn't know if the boy is just passing through. The boy has not said a word yet. He's not uttered a word of apology. He's not said anything, not even his silly speech. The father falls on his neck and kisses him and treats him as though he's already forgiven before the boy said a word. He doesn't know if he's passing through. He doesn't know if he's repentant. He treats him as though he's repented. He kisses him. The boy starts his speech. Look at what it says here in the passage. So he got up and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, the father saw him and felt compassion. He felt compassion. He felt the love, the sympathy for the boy. And he ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. He repeated Pharaoh's words. Even then, with the kisses from the father, he thought, I'll take advantage of it. I'll use Pharaoh's words. I'm not currently worthy to be called your son. But the father ignored all this. And he said to his slaves, quickly, bring the best robe and put it on him. He said, you know what? The village, I don't want the villagers to hurt him. They won't respect him. They hate him because he hurt me. But they'll respect my robe. They'll respect my party robe. They'll recognize it. If he's wearing my robe, they'll respect that. And put a ring on his hand. He sold the family signet. I want him to know that he's a son. He bears the family ring. I want it to be known to everyone that he's my son. And sandals on his feet. Slaves go barefoot. Sons wear shoes. And bring the fatted calf and kill it and let us eat and celebrate. There's no celebration without food and drink. A fatted calf, with the way they would prepare it with vegetables and as a stew, would usually feed up to about 200 people. In other words, he's inviting the entire village. Everybody's coming. Everybody's going to party because my son is home. They'll come and they'll party, not because of the son, because they're all angry with him. They all hate him. But they'll celebrate the joy of the Father. They'll celebrate his joy. Kill the calf. Bring him in, put my robe on him, my ring on his finger. Kill the calf. Invite the whole village. We're going to party. Why? For this son of mine was dead. He was dead because he chose to be dead. And has come to life again. Why is he alive? Because the Father made him alive. He was lost. He was lost because he chose to be lost. And has been found. He was found because the Father found him. And they began to celebrate. They ate. They drank. They celebrated the joy of the Father. And the son's got to be thinking, what just happened? You see, the Father took all the pain, all the shame, all the rejection, and turned it into grace. He turned it into grace. Great cost to himself. He endured pain and shame. And that's the thing a man never wanted to endure. He endured the shame and turned it into grace for his son. But you know what? It's not only one son that had a broken relationship with the father. You see, when all this started, the role of the older son was to be mediator. He was to be the intermediary. He should have gone to the younger son and said, no, you can't do this, and go to the father and say, I know that he said this, but you know, he needs help. And negotiated terms between them. But he was silent because he had a broken relationship with the father as well. He didn't do his duty. He was silent. And he was angry. He was also probably wise to the fact, well, if the dumb kid gets his share, I'll get my share too. Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he received him back safe and sound. But he became angry and was not willing to go in. You realize that is almost as big an insult to the father as the younger son paid by saying, I wish you were dead. His refusal to go in and to celebrate the joy of the father. He doesn't have to celebrate the brother. He can go in and celebrate the joy of the father, but he's refused to do that, and that is an insult to the father. The father is once again shamed. But the father came out to him. This boy also should have received the ceremony of rejection by the village because of the insult he paid his father. But he doesn't get that. The father takes that pain, that shame, and turns it into grace as well. The father came out and began pleading with him. The father pleading with the son when the son should have been pleading with the father for forgiveness. But he answered and said to his father, look, for many years I've been serving you and never neglected a command of yours, and you have never given me a young goat. What do you mean giving you a young goat? It's yours. He's already transferred it to you. You got all the goats and the calves that you need. It's yours. You've never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. What do you mean celebrate with your friends? Aren't your friends here? They're in the party, aren't they? Or have you also rejected the village and you got friends outside the village? But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, he didn't know that. He's made an assumption here. He's accusing the boy of something that's not mentioned earlier. He doesn't know what the son did. You killed the fatted calf for him. You have a right to it, but it's mine, but you have a right to it. And he said to him, son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. He just confirmed, it's all yours. It's all yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice. For this brother of yours was dead, and he's begun to live. And he was lost and has been found. Both sons were lost. One left, the other stayed. Both had a broken relationship with the father. Both shamed the father. Both rejected the father. And in both cases, the father took the pain of rejection and shame and turned it to grace. At great cost to himself, he turned it to grace. And he treated both boys as though they had been forgiven before they said a word, before they confessed. Even while they were yet angry, he treated them as though they were loved and accepted and forgiven. Forgiveness is the acceptance of having been found. The father found both boys. One finally was able, it appears, to accept it, stunned by it. The other is angry, perhaps rejecting it, but we don't know. How does the story turn out? I don't know. But then again, we don't know how your story turns out either. Or mine. We've rejected him. We have. We've caused him pain and shame. And he continues to take that pain and that shame and turn it to grace. Over and over again, he does it for you, for me, for everyone on the face of the planet. He takes our rejection and turns it to grace. That's the Father. This isn't the parable of the prodigal son. This is the parable about the heart of the Father. This is how he feels for lost people. It's how he feels about you. It's how he feels about every person on the planet. He loves them, and he takes their rejection and their shame and their pain and turns it to grace. That's our Father. Years ago, I taught school at a boarding academy, Rio Grande Valley of Texas, and I was a Bible teacher and counselor, and there was a kid that came. His name was Billy, and Billy was an introvert like crazy. Billy was only there one semester and then left, and it took us 3 weeks to realize he hadn't come back after the semester break because he was so quiet. Hey, I don't think he said more than 6 words to me while I was there. The kid was so shy, he just didn't talk. He didn't talk. And I don't remember getting 6 words out of the kid. And years went by. And I was now pastoring a church many miles away, and I got a phone call from this kid's mom, and she had to remind me who the kid was that I taught him. She said, Billy's got problems. He's in trouble. And I thought I'd call you because he always said you were the one closest to him when he was in school. I said, me? Kid said sex words to me. I was the one closest to him? Could you help Billy? I said, okay. I said, what's going on? Well, Billy got married. I said, Billy got married? How did that happen? She had to ask him, is all I can figure. How would she know he's even interested? I don't know. But he's got kids. And his youngest daughter was in the hospital. And they thought she might die. And the hospital was near where I pastored. I said, I'll go visit him. So I went to the hospital. And I went to the ICU for the children's ward, and I saw Billy sitting there, and he was by himself. His wife was in with his daughter, and so I sat down next to him, and I tried to talk to him, but some things never change. And it was painful getting any information out of Billy or getting any, he'd nod his head or shake his head. Maybe say a once in a while. I thought, thank you, Jesus, we got an And that's about it. So it was just painful, and so I prayed for him, prayed for his daughter. And then a little bit later, as I sat there in awkwardness, a woman came in about Billy's age. I looked up. She introduced herself as his wife, and she talked. Thank you, someone talks. She gave me the information about the little girl. She took me in, and I prayed for the girl, and I anointed her. And I went back out to Billy, and she talked some more. And she told me that Billy had left the school and joined the Navy and become a cook. And he just turned his back on God and turned his back on the school and everything else and on the church. But he was a cook, and when he left the Navy, he got a job as a cook. And they got married. Again, I didn't get the details on that. I'm still curious as to how that happened. But they were married and had these kids, and then he lost his job. And about that time, his daughter got sick, and his life was just broken. Just broken. And then she left, and I hated to see her go because I was stuck with Billy then. So I just sat by Billy, and we sat in silence, and I'd talk every now and then and get a head shake or something. And then all of a sudden someone walked into the ICU. Billy's back was turned to the door. I'd heard them coming, but Billy hadn't heard them. And they kind of hit the door hard, and it scared Billy. And he went like this. His arms and stiffened, and his eyes were wide open with fear. And when I saw the eyes, I knew what I had to do to help Billy, because I'd seen those eyes before. It's when our first daughter was born. You know, we did Lamaze, that's where the husband is there, and apparently we're important for childbirth then, because we have to tell the wife to breathe, and we count things and we measure things and we breathe, and because apparently women forget to breathe in childbirth. I don't know. And so I was there, and she went through transition where she's grabbing, you did this, you're going to die. I said, no, the doctor told me this is normal, we'll be okay. So eventually, the baby is born, and, the doctor's down there, and the women are not very, it's not a very dignified thing to go through, bless your hearts. But the mirror up there, so I can see what's happening. I think they got that mirror off the side of a Volkswagen, I'm not sure. But I'm trying to see in that mirror, and finally the doctor says, here's the head. And the nurse said, oh, that's beautiful. And I looked in the little Volkswagen mirror. It looked like a mud ball to me. But eventually our daughter was born, and the doctor was sticking things in her nose, and sucking out stuff. And eventually she cried. First and last time I enjoyed hearing that. And they cut the umbilical cord, and then he passed her off to the pediatrician. But as he did, he kind of, he was standing, between my wife's legs there. He kind of up and down with the baby to get it to the pediatrician. And when he came down, she thought she was falling. And her arms and eyes and legs went out, and her eyes were Billy's eyes. You think about it, up to that point, her world had been soft and dark, and right here, And she could hear the muffled sound of her mother's voice and food digesting around her head and the blood and the heart. And that had been her. And all of a sudden she was forced through a narrow passageway into this bright openness. And it was cold, and they stuck things in her nose and her mouth, and it hurt her, and she began to breathe and cry. And then, to top it all off, they dropped her. At least she thought they did, right? Her world had come apart. Nothing made sense anymore. And that's what Billy was going through. His world did not make sense anymore. He had no point of reference. Nothing. He was falling in an abyss of nothingness. So I became a presence for him. I just put my arm around him, and I held him. And every day I told him stories. I told him stories about a father who loved his sons. But the sons enjoyed the gifts, but eventually they didn't realize that the gifts would continue if they were with the father. And so the son left the father, and the gifts ran out. And when the gifts ran out, he was alone and lost. But the father took him back. The father loved him, and the gifts came again. As long as he was with the father, he had the gifts. And the father would see him through anything. And I told him the stories over and over again. And I just held him. Day after day, I held Billy. And I talked to him. Eventually, his daughter got well and went home. And then I got a phone call from Billy's wife. She said, Billy's found a job in another city and we're moving. And they were gone before I could get to them. And the months passed. And then I got a phone call from Billy's wife. And she said, things are going well. Billy's got a good job and our daughter is well. Our children are good. And we're going back to church now. And we're active in the church. I thought, well, I bet Billy's not a greeter. Don't know what he's doing. He's got to be mowing the yard or something, but he's not talking to anybody. And she said, but things are much better for us, and we're back in church, and we're active, and I'm just, and Billy wants to talk to you. This I got to hear. Put him on. And then I hear breathing. Billy? Billy, is that you? Billy, talk to me. Say something. Well, thanks. Click. Billy has a world now. And it's filled with his wife and his children, his church, but mainly it's the Father. The Father created a world for him. Because the Father sought him when he was lost. And the Father restored him before Bill even knew what was happening to him. He was restored. And the gifts started coming again. Because the Father cares about that which is lost. His grace is greater than you've ever dared dream possible. The Father cares. Jesus answered those who claimed that he was hanging out with the wrong group of people, and he said, these are my precious lambs. They're my great treasure. They're my sons and my daughters. Why wouldn't I rejoice when I find them? Why wouldn't I? God's grace is an amazing thing. You can't run away from it. You can't escape it. You can't shame it away. You can't paint it away. He pursues you. He's called the hound of heaven for a reason. He's on your track. He's after you. He's got the scent, and he won't let go because his grace is greater.
Circle of Hope Network, doing life and being church together.